Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our final piece of programming. It is truly almost unbelievable to me that we have reached this final point after such an amazing weekend. But before I introduce our phenomenal keynote speaker, I just want to tell you all a short story. Around this time of year, 2 years ago, I was a young, doe-eyed freshman just starting out here at the hotel school in the depths of COVID, sitting in a seat somewhere up there in the balcony during a virtual session of one of our Dean's Distinguished Lecture Series classes. Now, although much of my freshman year is a blur, I remember one specific Friday like it was yesterday, as I had the pleasure of listening to one of the most influential speakers I have ever heard. As the CEO and founder of Aptamind Partners, this speaker is an astonishing global leader in the hospitality industry that serves as a pioneer of multiple industry-leading projects centered around sustainability. She's been named one of the 50 most influential next-generation leaders who will define the future by Bilan magazine, and is also named in the top 25 most influential women in hospitality. But perhaps more importantly, aside from all the accolades, this speaker taught me perhaps the one thing I needed to hear as a confused freshman trying to find my place in the world. If you can dream it, you can do it. So with all that being said, it is my absolute honor and privilege to welcome to the stage that very speaker who taught us all that the hospitality industry is the home for anyone, regardless of your age, race, gender, sexual orientation, or nationality, to dare to dream. So with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Ms. Aradhana Khowala.
Thank you. Thank you.
Have fun.
Thanks. I think he was talking about me, although I have to confess I barely recognized them myself. Now, ladies and gentlemen, please lower your shoulder restraint. Keep your hands and feet in. And if you are on an anti-anxiety medication, now would be a good time to pop that pill. Now, if you've done all of that, buckle up and get ready for a wild ride. Because I have to say, I have a bit of a reputation that when I finish speaking, either it's a standing ovation or I leave people slightly smoldering. I'm not sure which one this is going to be. We shall see. But I have to warn you that some of what you might hear might be hard to hear, because I will sound perhaps accusatory at times, I will be complimentary at other times. But what I'm really hoping that even those of you who perhaps don't agree with me will, if not consciously, subconsciously recognize the underlying truth. And once you do, you will have a choice at such time. And at that point in time, may you choose wisely. Amen to that. Now, I have to say, secretly, I'm hoping your necks are going to hurt by nodding to me, your hands are going to hurt with all the clapping, and that you will be up on your feet when I finish with a standing ovation. Having said that, I will be just as fine with tomatoes. There is a reason I wore red. Eggs, perhaps, not so much. They really do hurt, and the dress doesn't dry clean so well. You must be wondering, oh my God, what kind of an audience is she usually speaking to? But hey, before I get started, can I just say, I am so happy to be back in Ithaca, back at Cornell. I absolutely love it here. Absolutely love it here. And I haven't stopped admiring the campus since I got here a couple of days ago. And that's saying a lot, guys, because I went to the enemy camp in Switzerland. I studied at École Hôtelière de Lausanne. But I genuinely believe you guys are the luckiest students in this planet. Where else do you get a waterfall on campus? Are you kidding me? And where else do you get a margarita with 8 shots of tequila? I have to also confess, the last time I was here on campus, I did go to EHL, but I did do a PDP at Cornell, so hopefully that atones for some of my sins. The last time I was here on campus, I tried one of these. And for the next 2 days, let's just say I was one with the toilet. But I am really, really happy to be here. I'm really happy to be here. I have so much of respect and affection for Dean Walsh and all the remaining other wonderful and distinguished faculty. You're building such a wonderful legacy here. I see the work that you do, I follow it. And in my own very little way, it is so wonderful to be part of that legacy. Like Lucas said, the last time I spoke here was during COVID, so on Zoom. And one of my most treasured archives are the handwritten notes that I got from some wonderful students at the end of my lecture, delivered to me in London. We all have those days when we wake up feeling less than adequate. And I can tell you, it's my instant dopamine hit, right? It's my pick-me-up. I quite literally live off them. So it's really wonderful to be back, this time in person, where we actually can be in the same room. And I can also lubricate my vocal cords with some water or wine or coffee or whatever else, which is even more wonderful. But really, as you know, have now been brought back on meal order all the way from London, UK, not London, Canada next door, because I was told I have an amazing ability to speak about things which people choose to ignore in a way that people want to sit up and listen. I call it telling it exactly as it is. Because quite honestly, I'm not sure if I'm qualified, if I'm equipped to speak about sustainability or the equality imperative. I'm not a hotelier. I'm not a psychologist. I don't represent a large corporation. But I am a woman. I'm brown, relatively young, or I look it. I have survived bias. I have cracked the glass ceiling, or at least I keep smashing against it. Perhaps that, my independence, my neutrality, and the fact that I will say exactly what I want because I don't give a shit, because I care very deeply, perhaps that is my superpower. Now, we have set the tempo with curses. This can only get more interesting from here. So let's start at the start, shall we? In the last decades, travel, tourism, and hospitality has boomed to be one of the fastest growing, most amazing sectors in the world. Back in 2019, we had 1.4 billion travelers around the world. That's 1 out of 6 of us making an international trip. And if I go by the current UNWTO figures, in 2023, we're going to hit 90 to 95% of the 2019 levels, which was the absolute peak. Ladies and gentlemen, tourism, travel, and hospitality is back. My question to you is, at what cost? An estimated 11% of global greenhouse gas emissions are due to the whole travel, tourism, and hospitality sector, and that's likely to double by 2050. The rising sea levels and frequent flooding in the same time frame can endanger and submerge entirely or partly 36 cities across the globe, which includes London, New York, Istanbul, Jakarta, New Orleans, Georgetown, and many others. Each year, 8 million tons of plastic end up in the world's oceans, where it's responsible for the death of up to 1 million seabirds, 100,000 sea mammals, marine turtles, and countless fish. With 80% of tourism happening somewhere in the coastal area, plastic from our sector is a huge reason for this pollution. And that number, by the way, is likely to go up 70% by 2050. We are responsible for land grabbing, cultural conflict with locals, driving up prices and crowding them out of their own neighborhoods. Of course, we bring in the dollars, but we also distort local development. Farmers sell their land to the hotel chain only for the price of crops they once grew to be beyond their reach because of inflation. Water is diverted to the golf course but the locals sometimes go short. The road is paved as far as the theme park, but not necessarily up to the schools. I'm sure you've all seen the Yellowstone TV show, which was quite a roaring hit on all kinds of streaming. It talks about the same topics. It deals with conflict, land preservation, and conservation. This is a mainstream discussion now against travel, tourism, and hospitality. And you know the fun part? Nearly 50% of all UN World Heritage Sites, which have been recognized by UNESCO for their outstanding natural wonder, do not have any kind of a tourism management plan as a part of trying to avert the negative impacts of tourism. No plan in place. And let's absolutely not go to the damage daft tourists make to the natural wonders or heritage sites or works of historic significance. Like the statue of St. Michael, where this crazy person wanted to hug the statue to take a selfie, breaking it in the bargain in Lisbon, Portugal. Or this woman who's clearly off her head, and I have no idea on what, because she's trying to do moonwalking on sea turtles in Costa Rica. And my absolute favorite, this dude who decides to leave a love note for his beloved on the seabeds by etching on rocks and corals in Bali, Indonesia. I don't know if you can read it, but it says, "Mia baby, send me nudes." Are you kidding me? This is a universal humanitarian appeal to Mia if you're listening. Dump him. Pronto. And what do? In every single interview of any travel, tourism, hospitality leader, what do we keep saying? Travel and tourism is responsible for 10% of the global GDP. Travel and tourism is responsible for 1 out of 9 jobs. Take us seriously. Give us a seat at the table. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we cannot keep on linking economic growth to an increase in GDP. GDP is blind to human well-being. GDP is blind to social well-being. GDP is blind to planet well-being. GDP ignores externalities. GDP ignores nature. If I go by the exact definition of GDP, it clearly specifies any purely natural process without human intervention or control does not constitute production in the economic sense. And if nature doesn't count, its destruction doesn't count and definitely doesn't come up on the accounting books, does it? And by the same definition, forest fires can technically increase GDP through all the expense we incur by the cost that's generated to put out those fires. You know what I'm trying to say here. GDP ignores externalities. GDP ignores nature. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not anti-growth. Quite the contrary, I am growth. I'm as die-hard capitalist as they come. But what I'm saying is we can no longer believe in decoupling economic growth with human well-being and planet well-being. We have to rethink our society. We have to rethink our priorities. We have to rethink what really matters. We have to change our mindset and we have to change the economic paradigm. Now that we have established the beautiful impact of tourism on the planet, let's talk about the people. Because I'm sure there's some of you in the audience who at this point in time are thinking, all right, yes, maybe, but what about jobs? We create employment. Sure we do. And we go back to the same stale numbers that we belt out at every given opportunity, right? Travel, tourism, and hospitality is responsible for 1 out of 9 jobs. And what's more, travel and tourism is responsible for 1 out of 4 or 5 new jobs that's created in the economy. And that's saying a lot, even in the current climate of automation. Are those jobs for locals? Are these jobs, or are they usually entry-level low paying, in informal employment with limited opportunities for upward mobility. Because I have data which says that 25% of people who work in our sector want to leave their jobs this year, in 2023. They say it's a war for talent out there. Why do you think that is the case? Could it be? Could it be because talent or human resources is not viewed as human? Could it be because people are commoditized and separated and crammed into labeled boxes and given badges and designations and confined to lines of progression from which escape is rare? This is so typical, right? Treat your employee like a number, like a robot, like a vending machine. Punch in the number as instruction, put in the coin, and then start tapping your feet till you get exactly what you want. And when you don't get what you want from the vending machine, start shaking the machine as if what you want is somehow stuck inside it. When you treat your people like a vending machine, let me assure you, a vending machine is exactly what you will get. And that will be fine for some of the time. But if you want to win in the long term, and if you want to win through volatility, you need a lot more than vending machine service. This commoditization of people in the workplace is nothing new. In fact, it's embedded in the language that we use in our sector. Employees, talent, team, associates, human resources. These terms strip away a layer of humanity, imposing uniformity in its place. They discourage nuance in favor of categories or grades. And once you dehumanize people, even by a fraction, you can do unconscionable things to them. Think about it. Discrimination, slavery, genocide. All targeted groups were somehow first framed as less than human. You know, we all forget our deepest human need is not material at all. It's not money. Our deepest human need is to be seen, to have an identity. A need is to have love. And I don't just mean the intimate kind of love. Most people bear the terminal stress of going through life unseen, unrecognized, like a mere slot in a vending machine. And as leaders, every single one of us have a responsibility to ensure it doesn't happen in your watch. And it's not because it's important to be nice, it's because it's important to be warm or whatever. It's not. It's simply because when you allow people to be seen as less than, it limits their contributions. The final thing you have to remember is because you're a leader, it doesn't give you a license to be a jerk. I actually wanted to use the word dick, but then I thought that's sexist. I don't know what's a lady dick, so I'm sticking to jerk, but I really, really mean it. In our industry, people think, and perhaps because of the complete number of jerks who seem to occupy positions of power in our sector, that people think that simply being a jerk increases your probability of winning. It's a bit like being a jerk is a performance enhancer of some kind. But there is no such connection, there is no such correlation. You don't have to be warm and fuzzy, but you don't have to be a jerk. Success doesn't require to be cruel. I told you I'm going to get into trouble here. But we do have a problem. We do have a problem in travel, tourism, and hospitality. And what fascinates me and what bothers me actually is how much of the old paradigm still dominates the way we think and the way we do things, right? Think about it. What has innovation? Patrick was talking about in the panel before. We've been laggards when it comes to innovation. Historically, innovation for us has meant coming up with a fancy adjective and placing it in front of tourism, which is a noun, and then peddling it as the next cool kid in town. Rural tourism, cultural tourism, sustainable tourism, transformational tourism, over-tourism. We just refuse to make space for the hard stuff, too often choosing the path of least resistance, what is easy, what is comfortable, what has been done before, when what we really need is radical change. You see, for the longest time, tourism has taken from the environment. Tourism has taken from the communities. Tourism has played a passive role. But the future of innovation, the future of tourism has to be one where we are moving from that passive role to an active role in global transformation, where we're actually removing social inequalities, we're improving working conditions, and we're decarbonizing the world and making it a better place for everyone. And as industry leaders, we have a responsibility to elevate that conversation, to change our mindset. We need new ways of doing, we need new ways of thinking, we need new ways of believing. We need to move our industry from extractive to ethical, exploitative to exploratory, to entitled to empathetic, exclusive to inclusive, and sustainable to regenerative. Now, this is important because I hate this word sustainable. Sustainable, by definition, says let's try and do damage control. It's defeatist before we start, right? I always give this example. Lucas's mom and dad, when big Lucas now was a little boy, you're sending him off to school, did you tell him, Lucas, go be less bad in school today? No, I hope, right? You would tell him, go be good today. And if you had Indian parents like me, they would say, go learn something. Sustainability is less bad. We need to make a transition from less bad to more good, which is regenerative. Here's another example. If someone asks you, how is your marriage? And you say, oh, it's sustainable. That's not going so very well, is it? The higher ambition, on the other hand, fosters hope. Look, I'm not here to moan, rant, air grievances, or bemoan the crosses I bear. Because most businesses, most leaders actually want to do better. Yes, sometimes tourism can be disruptive. Yes, sometimes it can be damaging. But it doesn't have to be this way. There is hope. And if you harbored any doubts that we can reach net zero by 2050, I would like to remind you that we have every reason to be optimistic because we live in times of moonshot breakthroughs. Despite all the barriers and negative consequences of tourism, we also have hundreds of businesses and leaders and individuals who are doing their bit to ensure tourism can actually be a force for good. Now, these are some examples where I have been involved in some capacity or the other, but they're only a handful examples. We have so many more. Red Sea Global, where by developing this site, they're going to add 30% biodiversity to the islands where they're going to be building. Bhutan, the government has a strict limit on the number of tourists they allow, and the country consistently ranks #1 in the World Happiness Index. Kerala, responsible tourism, where the local government is doing a very good job of really engaging the community and ensuring they're involved across the entire value chain. Global Himalayan Expedition. I'm going on a trek with them with my teenage son in summer. They actually electrify villages up in the Himalayas, so you trek with solar panels on your back and you electrify villages as you go along. Planet Abled, where this girl, Neha Arora, who runs it, is actually making travel accessible for everyone, including those of us who are differently abled. Kitro, which is a startup out of Switzerland that is fighting food waste. They have AI-enabled bins that actually track the amount of waste that you're putting in the bins, and it feeds into your budget and costing. Rwanda, which is a country I have a lot of respect for the amazing work they're doing with regards to the conservation efforts, especially of the mountain gorillas, where you find a lot of them in Rwanda and Uganda, a little bit in Burundi as well. But apart from these examples, think about it, right? We have so many innovations that have had an impact on the tourism sector in the last decades. Think about it, but did you know that the standard passport only came about after the First World War in 1920? Sunglasses were only introduced in 1929. 1930 was the origin of the air hostess, 1944 of the sunscreen. The first modern-day credit card only came about in 1950. 1951 was the travel backpack. 1969 was obviously also the year when man landed on the moon, but it was also the year where air travel was changed with the introduction of the Boeing 747. 1972 is when the first rolling luggage came about. 1974, the first minibar. 1978, the first hotel key card. 1983, the mobile phone number. 1989, World Wide Web. 1993, online maps. 1994, e-ticketing. 1996, creation of the first online travel agency, Travelocity. 1997, social media. And 2000, GPS. This is only up until 2000. And if you think about all that we have seen in the last 20 years, 23 years, since 2000, since the beginning of the new millennium, think about all the cool things, the innovations, the moonshots. 5G, camera phones, smartphones, Facebook, Twitter, Airbnb, Googlebot, YouTube, self-driving cars, touchscreen glass, robotic assistants, nanocircuitry, 3D printing, blockchain, AI cloud services, digital passports, augmented reality, meta-universe. 25 years ago, only 25 years ago, was the time where planning a trip required you to physically be at a travel agent's office, going through books, physical books. And like we heard Janelle speak early on, now you just ask ChatGPT to come up with an itinerary for you. The first hotel in space is likely to open in 2027, in the next 4 years. So why are we so pessimistic? We have every reason to be optimistic. If the first suitcase on wheels only came about in 1972, and if in the last 50 years our industry has created parallel meta destinations, flying virtual tours, pilotless planes and cars, supersonic flights and air taxis, and if we've sent tourists to space, why should we be pessimistic? We have every reason to be optimistic. So what does that mean? What does that mean? What do you do? I don't know. But I'd quite like to leave you with my 3 cents to blow up boundaries. Arnie style. The first one. We need to master the art of communication and storytelling. We need to make things sexy. Let me tell you, some of the biggest problems facing humanity is currently not getting enough attention exactly because of that. Let's take climate change as an example, right? The challenge of understanding climate change and scaling sustainable solutions is, it's not just about science, it's not just about funding, it's not also just about innovation and breakthroughs. It is also about, or it is just as much about communication. Climate change is a complex problem, it's a difficult problem, and it is slow-moving, it does not always seem urgent, and there is often very little gratification for acting to mitigate it. People don't fully understand climate change. And why do you think that is? Because more often than not, and I have nothing against scientists, but more often than not, we have a very grouchy, grumpy, boring scientist who's standing up and saying, based on the Paris Accord, the Earth's temperature is likely to rise by 2.5 degrees, and if we don't do blah, 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 there is a 100% possibility that the meteor is going to strike the Earth, and there is a 200% probability that it's going to kill us all. The message is important. But the audience is so bored listening that by that time they're like, oh my God, meteor, please come kill me because I can't take this shit anymore. We need to make climate change communication sexy if you want change. I'm serious. It's a call. If you want to make climate change, if you want to find a solution, I want pants to be the first casualty of global warming. Do you remember the UN Biodiversity COP conference which happened end of the year? It was a historic goal scored for humanity after years of painstaking negotiation, 15 years plus, which finally culminated in the adoption of the coming Montreal Global Diversity Framework, our shared international roadmap out of the ecological crisis towards a more nature-positive world. Does any of it ring a bell? No. Why? Because it didn't make the front page. You know what did? Messi did. Your eyes, my eyes, and a billion other eyes were fixated on the soccer field in Qatar for the World Cup at the same time. If more people grasp the pace, the severity, and the long-term implications of biodiversity loss, the eyes of the world would perhaps have been more focused on Montreal than Qatar. But it wasn't. We need to make climate change sexy. You know, emotions play such a huge role in how people engage, especially with risk, right? As human beings, our default mode is to ignore and be delusional and in denial about news which upsets or bothers us, which we don't want to hear. Think about it. If ironclad scientific and medical facts and more than 1 million dead Americans can't convince millions or couldn't convince millions to wear a mask or get vaccinated, what chance in hell do we have for people to care anymore about rapidly disintegrating glaciers, a warming atmosphere, or rising sea levels? And let me ask you, personally, from a communication perspective, from a storytelling perspective, what would you prefer? Would you prefer angry activists who are ruining your favorite pieces of art of historical significance? Or would you have researchers posed in the Arctic help with communication? And no, that is not objectification. That is not objectification. That is communication. I want to raise what Mindy said in the morning. This is 9 a.m. I don't know if you were listening to her lecture, but she said, if you want to go to Antarctica, you will have to pay $100,000 for sex. Everyone was listening in. 9 a.m., hangover out of the window, every single person was listening in. Sex stands for service excellence expectations, right, Mindy? Service exceeds expectations, but everyone was listening in. Political inaction or lack of resources is not our biggest enemy. Societal indifference is our biggest enemy. And what is really needed is effective public messaging and communication. The world needs a good story for all of us to unite behind us. The world needs a good story for us to act. And I'm astonished as to how many leaders fail to effectively market their ideas. It boggles my mind. And this is critical because delivery is not just about ideas. It's about taking the public along for a ride. It's about telling a story. That was tip number 1. Number two, the second thing we need, is to bring back leaders. Where have all the leaders gone? By which I mean the good leaders, the real leaders. If I ask you to think about some of the key leaders who have been visionaries in the 21st century, I'm sure you will rattle off a lot of names from Elon Musk to Steve Jobs, Larry Page perhaps, Bill Gates, of course, I don't know, Jeff Bezos perhaps, I don't know. A lot of names come to mind, right? If I ask you to name, well, let's say top 3, top 5 leaders from the tech space or from the finance world, you will be able to come up with 5 names who have completely transformed the industries and changed the game. If now I ask you to name leaders from the travel, tourism, and hospitality space who have changed the game, I don't just mean entrepreneurs, I just don't mean CEOs who are doing a good job with their respective companies. I mean leaders whose contributions and missions to go beyond their industry's company roles and self-interests. I mean people who have shown a strong drive to change the world. Leaders who have put their skills to the unknown, taken bold risks, created moonshot visions, and actually delivered on turning it into a reality. I know this is controversial. The truth is our sector lacks visionaries and unified voices to give us direction and inspire us. You must act now, commitments and plans for 2030 and 2050. It's great for the boardroom, it's great for the company website, but they also hide the reality of inaction. Most of the leaders, unfortunately, I told you I'm going to get in trouble here, especially CEOs of publicly listed companies or large corporations, despite all the challenges facing humanity, despite all the demands from the green traveler, despite the global call for action, I see nobody screwing with the rules of business as usual. I see nobody. Talking about screwing, that is not true, because the one name that does come to mind is Richard Branson, and it's not a coincidence that actually he wrote this book probably a good 20 years ago, 17, 18 years ago, which said, screw business as usual, turning capitalism into a force for good. Now, don't get me wrong, for the sake of full disclosure, the C-suite of the largest hospitality companies, they are my friends. It's not nepotism, guys. It's my social capital built over the last 25 years of working in a sector I absolutely adore. And that means when I travel, I get special treatment. I get preferential rates. I get multiple upgrades. I'm often in the finest suite in the property. And I want to tell you, all of that stops today. In fact, the next time I check in one of the big chains, perhaps there will be no housekeeping, there will be no room service, the sprinkler might go on in the middle of the night, and I might be left to clean my own toilets. But really, don't you think there is the difference between the CEO of a large corporation, publicly listed company, or just a large company, and let's say a Sir David Attenborough, who has devoted his entire life to documenting the love story between humans and nature and broadcast it to the world. And today, if we stand a chance of averting climate and biodiversity breakdowns and cleaning up polluted ecosystems, it's because millions of us fell in love with the nature that he showed us on telly. Or let's take Chef Jose Andres, who migrated from Spain to the US and founded World Central Kitchen in the wake of the Haiti disaster. And I ask you this today, 10, 20, whatever number of years here on, when people are looking at what they have achieved and what they have done in their life, what do you think you would choose? A CEO saying, when I was a CEO, my stock price went up 100, 200, 300%, and we had an increased footprint in all parts of the world? One option. Or the other person saying, when I was in charge, that summer, I fed hungry children. What would you choose? My third tip is to really obsess. Really obsess over all things diversity, inclusion, and that's not just gender, that's race, that's ethnicity, that's age, that is religion. I'm saying if you really want to solve the biggest challenges facing humanity, we need to celebrate our differences. Now, we recently published some research on gender diversity specifically in travel, tourism, and hospitality. This is the third edition. The first one was 2020, 21, and 22. Well, we were a bit late, so 2023 really. And this is the data of gender diversity of the largest publicly listed companies in the world. These companies employ millions, have operations in probably north of 150 countries, and have a market cap of trillions of dollars. And what we found was actually fascinating. We found there is enough pipeline or talent coming through the pipeline, but the glass ceiling is real. The three key findings. Number one, our real problem in travel, tourism, and hospitality is not recruiting women. Our problem is that the women in employment are likely to be concentrated in lower status and lower paid jobs. So our battle is twofold. Not only do we need to attract more girls to join the sector, number two, we need to elevate the girls who are in the sector to more leadership positions. The second finding was, look, a lot of organizations are working on promising solutions. And they've taken significant steps to address gender diversity. But it has simply not resulted in making gender diversity turn into a collective, cohesive movement that motivates action at scale. Case in point, I don't have the picture with me, but I have to say I did run this with Tony in the morning when I met him with Kate, so I'm going to share the joke. This came up on my LinkedIn feed, and it said, the big five of hospitality. And it was a picture of the big five CEOs of hotel companies globally, 5 men, all white. And I really laughed looking at the caption because it said big five, and I was so curious. Please, somebody tell me who's the elephant here and who's the rhino. But like I said, the third thing that we found from the report that we've now been tracking for the last 20 years nearly is progress is not actually equal across the different sectors within travel, tourism, and hospitality, right? So like the cruise industry struggle is to recruit women across the entire workforce, while in the OTA sector, the majority of the workforce, at 56%, they're actually women. But the trouble is only 16% actually get into the ExCom or the C-suite. In every sector, though, it doesn't matter which sector within travel, tourism, and hospitality, there is a sharp drop in female representation once you hit the highest echelons of leadership. And like I said, because progress is clearly not equal across the different sectors. So as an example, if you take the number of women on boards of these sectors, of listed companies in these sectors, as you can see, hotels show the biggest representation with women on boards at 28%. We have OTAs at 26, airports at 24, cruises at 22, casinos and entertainment companies at 21, while airlines are laggards in this particular subset with only 19%. They do well in other bits. At this point in time, some of you are going to turn around and tell me, oh, but look at all the progress that we have made, right? We have come such a long way. Look at all the progress we have made for women, by women, on behalf of women. But people forget how long this struggle has been going on. People forget that it has been 107 years since Emily Davison was killed by the horse of King George V for seeking a right to vote. People forget that it has been 126 years since Oscar Wilde was thrown in jail for being gay. 18 years since the repeal of Section 28, 187 years since the abolition of the Slavery Act. And by the way, women still don't have the right to vote in many countries. Being gay is still criminalized in parts of the world, and slavery still exists in our modern society. I spoke to a lot of CEOs and lots of heads of D&I, of hotel companies and otherwise across the travel tourism sector. And a lot of them use the word journey. And I find this metaphor of being on a journey really, really confusing, because people say, oh, we're on a journey when it comes to gender diversity, we're on a journey when it comes to equality, we're on a journey when it comes to all things DE&I. But I'm like, this is one hell of a journey where some people haven't still arrived at their destination. And guess what? Some people haven't even left the station. It is not a journey. It is people's lives that are expiring while you procrastinate. The simple fact is we just don't have more women in leadership because often change and excellence requires a shake-up. And the biggest problem is that many people, consciously or unconsciously, still endorse the deficit model, where blacks and women and ethnic minorities are seen as intrinsically broken, as if they're missing some vital, unidentifiable, unquantifiable quality, which is intangible, that will always make white and male the right choice when it comes to power. You know, there is a fun experiment by APS Intelligence, which is a consulting firm, where a random group of people, this was done in the UK, and it's a proper, diverse group of people, are given, and I would have done this, and perhaps you would want to do this as I talk you through this in your heads. You don't have to shout out the answers. So the deal is this. You will be given 60 seconds to think of the top words that come to your mind when I say LGBTQ. Women, blacks. And the same group will be given another 60 seconds to say, what are the words now that come to your mind? What do you think others think of women? What do you think others think of LGBTQ? What do you think others think of blacks? And I think the results are absolutely fascinating. So people's top words that come to mind for LGBTQ were gay, lesbian, a rainbow, pride, equality. Okay? Now, the same group of people, when they were asked, what do you think others think of LGBTQ? They said, different. Gay, strange, wrong, weird, hate. For women, the group was asked, what are the top words that come to mind when you think of women? The top answers were strong, weak, mother, caring, beautiful, determined. The same group of people, when asked, what do you think others think of women? Here are the words that came out. Emotional, weak, mother, annoying, sexy. This is my favorite. Cleaning. For blacks, the top words that came up was strong, athletic, sports, music, proud. The same group, when asked what do you think others think, they said criminal, athletic, poor, lazy, scary. The respondents claim to personally not harbor biases. But the same respondents say others do harbor these biases, right? My question is, who are these others? Who are these others? Are you not sure? Are you not sure some of that bias is somehow stuck somewhere hidden in each one of us. Look, everyone harbors biases. It's not something to be proud of at all. But equally, you don't have to feel guilty for being male, for being white, or for being straight, right? That is not the point, and it doesn't serve any purpose. That is not what I'm talking about at all. What I'm saying instead is if you are any of the above, perhaps you can appreciate a little better how it affects your worldview and by definition, your understanding of what it means to have some kind of a privilege. So start to reflect on yourselves, your choices, your influence, and the impact that you can have. Confront that good self in you. Am I doing okay with time? Okay, but I'm going to conclude now. And I want to do this because I believe if you want to talk about building a sustainable, equitable future, it starts and ends with you, each and every single one of us. And I want to conclude on that note with the notion of privilege. I'm going to borrow the words of one of my favorite authors, the basketball legend from the other end or the other side of the pond, John Amaechi. Privilege, not as a burden or as a responsibility, but as a moral imperative. Now, when I say privilege, a lot of you guys will say, oh, but I'm not privileged. I've had to work very hard for everything that I have achieved in life, and I am a go-getter. It's my pure hard work and everything else. I hear you, but that still doesn't mean you're not privileged in your own very different way. Privilege is real, guys, and it exists in many different forms, and every single one of us listening in this room, we are privileged in whichever way. Hear me out. Reflect on this. Your parents were educated. They valued education. There are huge advantages to that. You had access to books as children. There are huge advantages to that. Your parents read to you as a child. There are huge advantages to that. You went to the best schools, you had tutors, you end up in an Ivy League school. There are huge advantages to that. There is a kid. Imagine this kid, and every single one of us knows such a kid. And if you don't, imagine this hypothetical kid who grows up near where you grow up, who's cleverer than you, who's actually more driven, who is more ambitious than you, but who is nowhere near where you are today because of advantages that you necessarily didn't earn. That is privilege. You have advantages as a man. You never have to think about having only one AirPod when you're walking the streets at night, or making sure you take your headphones off one ear for fear of being attacked. When you go to a bar, you don't have to worry about someone spiking your drinks. There are advantages to that. You have advantages as a person without disability. You don't have to think about accessing a restaurant, a stage, or a vehicle. You don't have to worry about the loo where you will end up, or the bar where you end up, whether it'll have a loo that you can actually use. There are advantages to that. And the two of you, likely, advantage is real, guys. You probably don't have to worry about the police stopping you for a quick search like many other people, and there are advantages to that. Every single one of us are privileged. You are privileged. I am privileged. And if you don't know how to talk about your neighbor who's different than you, if you don't know how to talk to your classmate who's different than you, if you don't know how to speak of and with your coworker who's different than you, think about what are the implications of not knowing things that are so easily knowable. There's an implication for things that clever people choose not to know. Privilege is real. Confront it. Accept it. And that is the first step to an equitable future. And let me assure you, it's not going to be easy, because there will always be those who are resistant to equity. There will always be those who choose to ignore things and issues that challenge us. There will always be those who have only ever been good enough. There will always be those who choose to be nothing more than good enough, despite the potential to do more and be more. But let me assure you that they will lose one day. And if any of you have even the slightest apprehension, slightest doubt about opportunity, and are concerned what might the personal consequences of equity be to you as an individual, let me tell you, let me assure you, if you're ambitious, if you're driven, if you're hardworking, if you're agile thinking and learn from new ideas, you will never lose in an environment of equity and dignity. You will never lose in an environment of equity and dignity. So when you graduate, when you leave here today, don't think about what you're going to do. Think about who you're going to become. And think about what will you do when it's your turn to lead. Thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much.